people consider euthanasia as an option?
How do we really know we are doing the right thing?
Is goodness and badness intrinsic in the act?
Why the government could amend laws
If morality is absolute?
Is there no correlation between morality and justice?
Is it really good to punish criminals?
What about in wars and death penalty?
Is abortion absolutely wrong? What about rape victims?
People from different walks of life, different cultures, customs, traditions, nationalities, belief systems, and sexual preferences, existing, surviving, and living within the same space. But how do we exist in relative harmony? Morality is one of the most important factors for human society to flourish and stay organized. But even identical twins, raised by the same parents, may have different beliefs on what is right and wrong, good and bad, proper and improper, just and unjust. However, despite of our differences, we managed to formulate a moral code that would bind human as a species together. That is, respect for human life.
The truth is that the problem of abortion is not a belief on the sanctity of human life. When people believe on what is benefiting them and not what does not benefit them but benefit others. To make it worse, children are innocent people, defenseless, so we need to defend them. We don't need to abort them.
Basically, with an egg and a sperm meet, there's already life in that essence. When they become a zygote, there's already life, and we have no right to take the life of a person. So I stand against abortion based on two principles. First, the principle of non-maleficence, and the principle of autonomy.
And the gift, actually, sex is gift between the married men and women. That's why some of them explore it. It's been abused. So my belief on that it's only between men and women, because God never created Adam and Steve, but Adam and Eve. So there is no same-sex marriage, because it's an insult for the ones who created us.
Ako supak sa balaod nun nga divorsyo kon divorce. Tungod kay ang magtiayon sa panahon sa ilang kasal, ila kining gipanumpaan atubangan sa pare o sa mga witnesses nga walay makabulag kanila gawa sa kamatayon.
The Catholic Church, and I as well as member of the Catholic Church, is strongly condemn human cloning and even any related scientific experiments, because it could open dangerous paths and attack human life.
Hello everyone, once again this is Oliver Perater, and today we're going to tackle Jeremy Bentham's teachings on utilitarianism. In his famous and influential book known as An Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation, Bentham brought us a new set of moral principles that deviate from the teachings of the Christian Church and of course from the teachings of the natural law theory of St. Thomas Aquinas. As modern philosophers, Bentham and Kant had a lot of similarities, but still their teachings are fundamentally different. Similar because, just like Kant's Copernican revolution, Bentham would begin with human being. And also both hate imposed moral codes. But unlike Kant, Bentham does not believe in universal and absolute moral standard. Kant's moral teaching is devoid from human experience, while Bentham's begins with it. Hence, while Kant's moral principles are constant, Bentham's are dynamic. For Bentham, moral principles must change and relative to changing social environment. Bentham abhors universal rules and commandments to be obeyed by everyone regardless of one's gender, one's culture, and current situation. So these rules are absolute and do not respect individual differences. Whether you are straight or a gay, homosexual act is wrong. Whether you are a victim of rape, abortion is wrong.
Imagine a rape victim forced to bear the child of a rapist inside her belly for 9 months. Isn't it traumatic? Then the child is born with almost the same physical features with his father, and she would regularly see his face probably for the rest of her life.
I'm not trying to neglect the well-being of the child, but I am also trying to consider the well-being of the mother, the rape victim. We also need to emphasize that it could have a lot of effects to the victim's well-being, and this is also Bentham's concern. Bentham teaches that instead of subscribing to absolute and universal rules which are detached from experience, we would rather begin from existential condition of the individual human being. That is, we have to begin with particular human experience. We need to consider what the person is undergoing in a specific period of her life. Highly influenced by the age of reason, this is indeed a paradigm shift of philosophical focus from God to human, putting primacy on understanding the world from human standpoint and making man as the center of inquiry. Known as the classical utilitarian, Bentham is concerned with legal and social reforms. He advocates for the consideration of individual and social experiences over the reigning universal standard imposed on individual or society. Utilitarianism teaches that an action has no intrinsic and absolute moral worth. So clearly, this is a movement away from the dominion of authorities, such as feudal lords, king, church authorities, and even feudal parents, towards respecting individual choices. So instead, for instance, of following the rules of the authorities, which are absolute, one may also have to start with individual human experience. It is one thing to follow a rule, thou shalt not kill, and it is another thing to ask why one has to be euthanized, or why a specific girl has to abort her pregnancy. In other words, utilitarianism provides us another way of being moral apart from universal rules and scriptural prescriptions. Thus, reason alone could give us an edge to become moral individuals. And actions and laws are to be made in accordance with their circumstantial advantages, rather than on their intrinsic nature. So, utilitarianism has a lot of forms. But in general, the doctrine holds that the morality of an action, or human action, is determined by its usefulness. For this theory, the best action is the one that maximizes utility. Bentham describes utility as the property of something whereby it tends to produce benefit, advantage, pleasure, good, or happiness, or to prevent the happening of mischief, pain, evil, or unhappiness to the party whose interest is considered. Mill adds, the greatest happiness principle holds that actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. Utilitarianism is considered as consequentialist ethical theory. So, but before we go on to that, let us discuss natural law a bit. Natural law considers actions as moral, immoral, or amoral. So, or good, bad, and morally neutral. So, what do we mean with that? So, actions that subscribe or that conform to the norm are considered moral, like helping people, giving alms, saving lives. Those are considered morally good actions. Actions that do not subscribe or do not conform to the norm are considered as morally evil or immoral. So like stealing, like murder, for example, or rape. So, but there are actions that cannot be considered as good or bad, like walking, shouting, for example. In themselves, intrinsically, they are considered as amoral or morally neutral. However, utilitarianism as consequentialist ethical theory turn this idea upside down by claiming that no action can be considered as good or bad. All human actions are to be considered morally neutral or amoral. Meaning to say, stealing and murder are not bad in themselves, while helping and saving lives are not good in themselves. So what is important in utilitarianism is not the act itself, but the consequences of the act, the outcome or the result of your actions. So no matter what you did, as long as it produces good outcome, it is good. But if your action produces evil outcome, then it is evil, even if you are helping person, or even if you are trying to save life, even if you are trying to sacrifice yourself. If it produces no good outcome, there is nothing good in there. What you do is not an issue, but how beneficial it will be. What matters is not the act, but the result of the act. So it is not important whether you save someone's life or you kill somebody. What is important is whether that produces good and beneficial result. Now, if you die to liberate your country, but after your death, your people remains enslaved, now what's the value of your sacrifice? It is worthless because it produces nothing good. According to Mill, a sacrifice which does not increase or tend to increase the sum total of happiness, it considers as wasted. Unlike Christian morality, which is based on absolute and universal rules, utilitarianism mainly bases its judgment on the result of the action, and its moral rules are not absolute, for they should be altered whenever the circumstances change. Moral rules and laws should not be absolute and universal. The law should only exist and continue to exist if it remains beneficial to society. Beneficial means it produces good outcome. If it were no longer useful, or if it is no longer producing good outcome, then it has to be amended. Nothing is permanent. Societies are changing, so as our moral rules. One-child policy, for instance, might be beneficial to countries like China, which is overpopulated, but not to European countries which are struggling to maintain and increase its population. So the former must discourage pregnancy, while the later must encourage pregnancy by giving, for example, rewards to couples that manage to repopulate. The same utilitarian principle must also apply to abortion, euthanasia, contraception, divorce, what else? Capital punishment, as long as these laws must produce good outcome or beneficial outcome for society. Bentham's utilitarianism is also considered as hedonist. He says that nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. So this is the hedonic aspect of Bentham's moral theory. Hedonism is taken from the Greek word hedon, which means pleasure. Accordingly, all hedonistic theories identify pleasure and pain as the only important elements of whatever phenomena they are designed to describe. Hedonism exists in various forms and tradition, but Bentham's hedonism is widely taken from the teaching of Epicurus of the ancient Greece. The same author interprets that for Epicurus, happiness was the complete absence of bodily and especially mental pains, including fear of the gods and desires of anything other than the bare necessities of life. Following the doctrines of consequentialism and hedonism, Bentham teaches that an action or law should produce more pleasures than pains in order to be judged as good. If it produced more pains than pleasures, then it is judged to be evil or bad. Nothing is intrinsically good but pleasure, and nothing is intrinsically evil but pain. Utilitarianism can also be considered as a democratic moral theory because it advocates for the majority rule in moral judgment. So the moral worth of an action or law should be based on majority rule, if not all. This principle is known as the greatest happiness principle. As much as it rejects the political system, whose leaders are chosen accordingly by God or authorities, like kings, because it advocates that leaders should be elected by the people, at least by the majority. Utilitarianism also rejects the moral teaching that right and wrong depends on what God commands, since it teaches that the moral worth of an action or law should be decided by the people, at least by the majority, if not everyone. Bentham concerns with the well-being of all people. So according to his disciple John Stuart Mill, the utilitarian standard is not the agent's own greatest happiness, but the greatest amount of happiness altogether. Consider, for instance, a 98-year-old grandpa dying in the ICU, and the entire family is spending $200 per day, or 10,000 Philippine peso a day. And some students have already stopped studying or schooling, and some properties are being sold, and some others are in danger of being sold. So the entire family is in the middle of a situation by which they have to make series of decisions and choices. And the most difficult of which is to choose between the life of the dying old man and the future and well-being of the entire family members, especially the young generation. Should you sacrifice the future and well-being of the entire family members? Or should you choose to sacrifice grandpa instead? So for Bentham, the answer is very simple. Just kill grandpa. Or let us put it in a euphemistic way. End the suffering of grandpa. And at the same time, you end the suffering of the entire family members. So for utilitarianism, you can sacrifice one for many, but never sacrifice the many for one.
So how? How do we really know if we're doing the right things?
He developed this mathematical device known as hedonic calculus or philosophic calculus. So the purpose of which is to measure the pains and pleasures of the outcome of the act. But basically, it will be discussed in separate lecture video. This would be all for today. So I hope the discussion on hedonic calculus will be uploaded soon after this video will be uploaded. So thank you very much. Keep safe and have a nice day.